This video is brought to you by the letter S, which is both the first and fourth letter in the word subscribe. So do it. Please. Yes, folks, that is not a typo. We are talking about the animated PG-13, surprisingly violent, The Dark Knight Returns, Parts 1 and 2. These movies are based off of Frank Miller's graphic novel, and Part 1 starts off with an aged Bruce Wayne who retired from crime fighting 10 years ago, but as of late, Gotham has been getting worse due to a mutant uprising, and after seeing murder after murder on the news, Bruce Wayne decides to get back in the game and become Batman again. And watching him get back into it kind of felt like that part of The Dark Knight Rises where Batman finally shows up at that 45-minute mark and you get that rush of energy where you're just like, yes, welcome back, Batman. And I'll admit, I got that feeling here too, but it's even better in this one because it happens a lot sooner. And of course, Batman is old. Like, not only is he rusty, he's just old. So he's got to save Gotham once again while dealing with this huge handicap. And Peter Weller does a great job of portraying this character, even if I felt that his Batman voice did seem a bit flat. Also in the background, you have Gotham news media covering all the occurrences in this movie. You have people cheering for Batman, and you have people calling him a menace. It's this nice back and forth. And I also found this to be like a very well-rounded movie. Like, we really got to see Batman fight in this one. He's just not punching people. He's using gadgets. He's using smoke. He's dragging people when they least expect it. And it's really, really cool to watch. And the fights in this were brutal. Like, I really love the sound. Like, you felt every blow delivered. I just wish that the mutants were better fleshed out in terms of where they came from exactly. But that's just a minor complaint on my end. The only real misstep, in my opinion, is the introduction of the new Robin character, who is female this time. I'm not a Robin hater, but the way she was just introduced, the whole time I was just sitting there groaning. This girl we briefly get introduced to early on just decides to buy a Robin suit, which is apparently fairly easy to get. Next thing you know, she's running on rooftops doing flips, and next thing she's fighting crime. And they kind of gloss over her backstory, like Batman looks at her and asks her, "Where'd you learn this stuff?" And she just stares at him blankly, and then it is never brought up again. But like I said, I just had a problem with her introduction, not her character. Like, I like the way that they used her in the third act. In the end, The Dark Knight Returns Part 1 is a great adaptation of the graphic novel that proves that even in his old age, Batman has barely lost the touch. And this movie ends in such a way that really sets you up for Part 2. So let's switch gears. So two-parters such as this, Part 1 is usually the build-up and Part 2 is the payoff. And while Part 2 definitely has more action, I have to admit I enjoy Part 1 a lot more. Part 1 ends with the setup for the Joker, so you're under the impression that you're going to get a movie starring the Joker, but it actually ends up taking place on a much grander scale. And you're thinking, whoa, this could actually be interesting. I want to see where they're going with this. But while Part 1 was more concise and more together with its themes and plot points, Part 2 ends up being all over the place, and there's some character actions that really didn't make all that much sense to me. And I really ended up missing that focused narrative. Batman went into retirement for a reason, and the people involved with that decision say, yeah, we're not cool with you doing this again, so we're going to have to make you stop. So that's one thing he's got to deal with. He also has to save Gotham from a deadlier than ever Joker, who at one point is just running around a theme park stabbing people all willy-nilly. Gordon goes into retirement, so Batman has to deal with the new commissioner who wants him arrested. And there's a war going on and such that ends up affecting Gotham at one point. And individually, all these plot points are interesting. The problem is they don't blend that well together. And Batman ends up making some decisions that had me scratching my head. The first time he tries to confront the Joker, instead of going for the Joker, he just beats up the cops on the roof while the Joker is doing his thing. And I'm just sitting there thinking, Batman, stop beating up the police, especially since the new commissioner already hates you. You're not doing yourself any favors. But I mean, I don't want to sound negative the entire time. There are some pros in this. The animation is still great. I like this portrayal of the Joker, even though the chemistry isn't that strong between him and Batman. But there's a lot more action in here than in Part 1. I wouldn't say it's better. There's just a lot more, and Robin puts a decent use here. And this Part 2, is way more violent and graphic than Part 1. Like, Part 1 had scenes that made me cringe a little. Part 2 has scenes where I just flat out had to look away from. And Part 2 also has this. No comment. I mean, there's certainly a lot more about part two that I could elaborate on, like other plot points and other new characters introduced, but I just don't want to give away the whole movie for those unfamiliar with the story because it has its share of surprises. And I'll just say that it's not all about Batman. There's a much bigger picture here. And with one of the characters that show up here, I loved how they foreshadowed it in part one. I strongly recommend watching part one, but I can't really say don't watch part two, even though I didn't like it as much, because it is one large connected story. I would say watch and enjoy part one, and maybe lower your expectations a bit for part two, which in all honesty does make for a decent conclusion in of itself. It's just that the execution is a bit shaky. But despite my complaints, kudos to the director, the writers, the animators, and the voice actors for bringing this story to life. You guys did a great job, and you've definitely encouraged me to watch more animated Batman movies. In the end, The Dark Knight Rises... Wow, I can't believe I did that. In the end, The Dark Knight Returns is a great...